Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome to the channel. Today I want to go back to one of the things that you all seem to really enjoy on my channel, and that's consoles. Now, I've talked about quite a few of these on the channel, from the Magnavox Odyssey all the way up to the Sega Dreamcast. Heck, I've even talked a little bit about Atari in the overall sense, but I've never really dipped too far into the individual systems, which may be something I do at some point. But today I thought I'd talk about an Atari console that I didn't really even know existed until I was searching for some of the rare consoles over the years, and ran into something that, honestly, I didn't know about. And that's the Atari XEGS, which was a system released after the 7800. For those of you looking at me like I grew another head, trust me, I was confused as well. I thought their last console at the time ended with the 7800 myself. I'm sure some of you Atari aficionados are like, pleb, and you're right to call me that. But if you're curious, like I was, grab a snack and sit back a while as we dig into this console, how it came about, and what games worked with it, and if it was backwards compatible with anything else that we have on the docket. So, that said, hang out a while. This one should be kind of cool. So, those of you who are up on Atari's history likely already know this, but the company got into a bit of anything and everything video game and PC related. I'm talking anything from the Mind Link, which was an attempt to use the power of your mind, or, well, more appropriately, forehead to control a video game. Seriously, I literally did an entire video on it. All the way to computer systems with a great deal of success. They even often based a lot of their console architecture for their consoles off of their PC line. However, many of them, like in the case of the Atari 15200, weren't really compatible with the software in the PC line. One of the PC lines that was opted into to fix this was the XE line of computers that came out in 1985. Now, this was one of the last line of computers that Atari actually ever produced, and were 8-bit computers with two variations, the 130XE and the 65XE. These two were beefed up versions of the 800XL computer with a new management chip and a huge amount of RAM for the time, 128K. I know, just mind-boggling, but at the time 128K was actually huge. But that was even only in the 130XE version. Now, the more commonly purchased, I would assume, 65XE, had a pared down 64K of memory. What's funny about these two computers is that, well, they didn't last very long. You see, Atari already had the ST line of computers with more memory and 16-bit graphical capability coming out or already out at the time. However, before that happened, a rather odd variation of these two XE computers came out in the form of the Atari XEGS. Now, the Atari XEGS was in part PC and in part console, much like its 5200 counterpart. It was built more in a console form factor to be more approachable and sellable by toy companies. When asked if the toy companies would rather have another 8-bit machine like the 65XE or a game console, they resoundingly replied that they'd rather have a game console. Now, this console actually came in two different SKUs, one with a console and a joystick, and a basic console package. The more deluxe set came with a console keyboard, a joystick, and a light gun. Now, given it's the same base unit regardless, you could always add the extra attachments later if you wanted to. On top of this, the unit had a DIN connector on the back to basically power peripheral ports, and connecting disk drives and other attachments more like a common PC would. This could make the XEGS a full-on computer capable of playing and using software on almost all 8-bit lines and many prior consoles due to its card slot. On top of this, it could even use a printer. One of the funniest things about this is getting this computer in a console format took nearly 2 years, as the XE line of computers launched in 1985, and the XEGS wouldn't actually launch until 1987, 2 years after that line came out. Probably long after the ST line was getting more market penetration than anything else they had. Now, I know what you're asking though. How did this thing work? Did it boot up the BASIC? Did it have some sort of other interface entirely? What games launched for it? How long was it out for? No, just chill. These are solid questions and ones I plan on tackling to the best of my ability. So with that said, let's actually talk about how this thing booted up and worked first. The base unit, without the keyboard attached to it, would actually launch into a fully built version of Missile Command, which Honestly, it was kind of nice to get as a packing game right into the console. In my opinion, it was a very popular game for a long time. Now, obviously, if you booted it up with a card in it, it would actually boot up into that particular game, which begs the question of what carts could this thing actually use? Well, this is where some good and some bad comes into play. You would think that given it's based off the 8-bit architecture like the Atari 5200, it would work with those titles in any of the 8-bit computer games. And you'd be wrong. Yeah, somehow, someway, even though they use similar computer architecture, the XEGS could only use 8-bit Atari PC games. Yep, it could in no way use anything from the 2600, 5200, or 78 lines of consoles. Just why, Atari? You confuse me so much. This honestly in my mind makes very little sense, as almost everyone around this time had some sort of adapter to let their consoles play at least 2600 games.
Is the arcade experience. We're ColecoVision, and we bring the arcade experience home. With arcade graphics, like Donkey Kong with multiple screens, just like the arcade game, arcade controls. And ColecoVision is an expandable system. Plug in the first expansion module and play all Atari VCS-compatible cartridges. More arcade games than any other video system. Now, bring the arcade experience home, because your vision is our vision. ColecoVision.
So why it didn't do that natively or have some attachment is just confusing, baffling, and frustrating. Even more confusing is the fact that this thing came and used a standard CX40 controller. You know, the same one that came with the Atari 2600. So it could use many of the same peripherals, but none of the games. I just can't. I'm not surprised. I'm just disappointed, Atari. I'm just disappointed. Now, this isn't to say that the library is bad. It just feels like a massive mess, in my opinion. The light gun coming with the console's more deluxe model gave you access to games like Barnyard Blasters, Bug Hunt, Crime Buster, and Crossbow, which was a great addition, particularly to have on something that's this kind of hybrid between a console and a PC. The other upside is if you had this light gun from another console, like say a 2600 or 7800, you actually wouldn't need a new version to work with the XEGS, as you could use the same one regardless of console. This was actually really, really nice. And it was one of the nice things about a lot of Atari's equipment. A lot of it was compatible from console to console, and sometimes console to PC. This included a keyboard that was just an 8-bit computer keyboard, allowing the XEGS to become a fully fledged computer with the right attachments, but still without needing extra accessories, more focused around playing computer games on a more traditional style console system. What about the games, you ask? Well, it mostly used 8-bit games. You know, these were all a part of the Atari lineup, though some were labeled for the XEGS, 32 in total, but it was compatible with a full gamut of games, giving it a very healthy library in the 8-bit PC market. It's not an insubstantial run that it had either. It ran from 1987 all the way to 1992. So for a console that not as many people knew about, that it was an odd hybrid, it actually had a 5-year run almost. That's honestly pretty respectable in my opinion. Now I know you're like, well, you're just going to bash on Atari. Well, not necessarily. I am a little bit on this console because it's just a little bit of a confusing piece of tech. But I bet you're wondering what the public's reception was to it at the time, and that's fair. And that was, honestly, the reception was mixed. That's the best I can say it. To go into a little bit more detail, sales seemed okay, about 100,000 units being sold Christmas of the year it came out, with many people actually claiming that the mix of computer gaming and console was a brilliant idea. Now, others weren't too thrilled at having a computer line married with a console. They thought that this weakened the case for Atari being taken seriously in the computer space. And the computer space had been heating up for years now, and would be entering in a whole new era in the mid-90s. Not only with the rise of more impressive processors and graphics cards and things like that, but also the rise of internet and online commerce. It also seemed kind of dated to many based on using a 10-year-old architecture that was rapidly being put aside in favor of more advanced machines of the day. I.e., you know, the HPs and the Pentiums and the graphics cards and everything of that matter. Now, that's not to discount it. I mean, the 8-bit era was still going strong with consoles like the NES and the Master System, so 8-bit gaming was still alive and well. but it was on the wane. Especially with new consoles like the Genesis and the Super Nintendo coming out, and within a few years of that, it just seemed like Atari's name wasn't as strong. They didn't have a more modern 16-bit console. They were leaning more on the PC market, and they were using an older architecture. And realistically, their name hadn't been as strong since they had been right around the video game market crash in the early 80s in the United States. This made a lot of people leery of the brand because they hadn't really done much to recover since that past part outside of the computer space. And honestly, it kind of would affect their latest console, the Jaguar, when it dropped as well in 1993.
You believe your system is the most advanced in the universe. Let's review the numbers. Sega Genesis is 16 bits. 3DO is 32 bits. The Atari Jaguar is 64 bits. Which is more advanced? Clifford! 16 and 32 are less than 64. So with 64 bits, 3D graphics, real-world animation, and lightning speed that you can only get with Jaguar, which is more advanced? Clifford!
Can you repeat the question?
Jaguar! Jaguar! Jaguar!
They just didn't have as strong a presence as they had commanded at one point. The simple fact is, things were moving fast with consoles and computers, going from 8-bit graphics all the way to 64 and above graphics in a space of around 10 to 11 years. That is an astronomical jump in technology, especially one to try to keep up with the kind of budget that Atari had around this time. And honestly, that was one of Atari's biggest problems in the market, is they helped start into the market early on, and then the market just exploded and advanced so fast that they were struggling to keep up with occurring trends, developing technology, and to be able to keep up with the graphical and adjustments from arcade gaming to more console gaming to more story-driven gaming. And it's not the only company to suffer that way, but a very important one to suffer in this way as well. So with all these fluctuations in the market and all these advancements and odd decisions on Atari's part and the weird mix of PC and console, the XEGS would just kind of go down as a little known console, probably clamored after more around core Atari fans than really anyone else. It was too little of a computer to catch the PC crowd, and too little of a console to catch on with the console crowd. And far, far too many competitive options in both spaces offering newer ideas at competitive, if not better, price points, left the XEGS sort of an almost unknown dark horse among its own suite of products. However, what do you guys actually think of this one? Did any of you ever have an XEGS, and if so, what did you think of it? Were any of you fans of the XE line of computers, and how good were those next to the 400 and 800 lines that they had out using similar software? Heck, what's your favorite Atari product? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, if you don't mind, please leave this video a like. And if you see more of my content you like, possibly something on the screen now, consider following the channel. That actually helps me out a ton. Until we meet again though, thank you so much for spending part of your day with me, and happy gaming.